Boa noite a todos. É um prazer para mim coordenar este webinar junto com o Dr. Fernando Moraes, do Recife. Nós vamos tratar do assunto que é a exclusão do apêndice atrial esquerdo, os impactos no tratamento da fibrilação atrial e o protagonismo dos cirurgiões nessa atividade. Meu nome é Renato Calil, sou de Porto Alegre, professor titular da Universidade Federal de Ciências da Saúde em cirurgia. O professor Fernando Moraes é presidente da Sociedade de Cardiologia de Pernambuco e trabalha no Instituto do Coração de Pernambuco. Nós teremos 3 palestrantes. O primeiro será o Dr. Mark Gerdes, que é chefe do Departamento de Cirurgia Cardíaca e Cardiotorácica do Franciscan Heart Center em Indianápolis, nos Estados Unidos. Nós teremos a seguir o Dr. Ricardo Ribeiro Dias, que é responsável pelo núcleo de miocardiopatias e doenças de aorta do INCOR, em São Paulo. E, em terceiro lugar, o Dr. Ricardo Miguel Francisco, que é membro especialista da SBCCV e é cirurgião de referência da Rede Amil e da Rede DOR, no Rio de Janeiro. A primeira apresentação será a do Dr. Mark Gerdes, que será sobre fechamento do apêndice atrial esquerdo, o mínimo que nós podemos fazer. In closing the left atrial appendage, the least we can do. Professor Mark Gerdes, you may start your presentation. I just presented all the speakers and you are the first. Thank you very much for joining us, and the word is with you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So thank you for this wonderful invitation and greetings to everyone. We're going to talk specifically about a part of the Cox-Maze operation. We're going to talk about management of the left atrial appendage and this very crucial component. And indeed, in patients, certainly in patients who have atrial fibrillation, the least we can do is to manage the left atrial appendage, the least we can do. So those are my disclosures. So to start off with, just to kind of put things in framework, the Society of Thoracic Surgeons, American Association of Thoracic Surgery, Heart Rhythm Society, all have recommendations about what to do when a patient who has atrial fibrillation is having heart surgery. And they all recommend ablation, treatment of the atrial fibrillation. That's true for the Society of Thoracic Surgeons, which demonstrates fairly clearly that you don't increase operative risk, and it's recommended, not just reasonable, to treat the atrial fibrillation. And it's also true that they include in there specifics about managing the left atrial appendage. In other words, at a minimum, the left atrial appendage should be addressed in people with atrial fibrillation. When HRS, the Heart Rhythm Society, joined with the other major societies and reviewed the data with respect to management of atrial fibrillation for patients having heart surgery, it included heart surgeons on the review team, and they came up with very similar findings. Recommended for mitral surgery, recommended for coronary bypass and aortic valve surgery. So, however, what is it that really drives the risk of atrial fibrillation for human beings? Admittedly, atrial fibrillation itself lowers your cardiac output, causes fatigue, ease of fatigability, leads to heart failure and cardiomyopathy. But the thing that kills the patients, the thing that most commonly kills the patient, causes devastation in their life, is the left atrial appendage. And it's because of this, the thrombus that exists frequently in the left atrial appendage. And of course, when we do find clot in the heart, the most common place to find it is in the appendage. So what about closing the appendage? How well do we do that as surgeons if we want to just close people's appendages? As it turns out, we don't do it very well. 2005, the first of a series of studies, the LAOS trials, left atrial appendage occlusion studies, showed that they were randomizing patients either having their appendage closed or left untreated with patients with atrial fibrillation. And one of the interesting things they found was that occlusion of the left atrial appendage was achieved in only 45% of patients using suture technique, 72% using staplers. So not very good. But importantly, for the patients who were successfully closed, there was a 54% reduction in stroke incidence. In other words, when they did succeed, they decreased the incidence of stroke substantially. So this is a study from Cleveland Clinic and Darien, and this took a look with transesophageal echocardiography at how successfully appendages were closed. As it turned out, again, not very well. Even with excision, in other words, cutting out the appendage, 27% of those patients had a remnant or a stump of the left atrial appendage. Suture exclusion didn't do well, stapler. And when they looked at the incidence of thrombus formation at the base of a poorly closed appendage, it was especially bad for suture exclusion and staplers. Excision at least did not find thrombus, but they did have remnants. So you don't know unless you look. This is a patient for whom I had done bypass, AVR, and a maze. And 6 years later, I had to go back to repair his mitral valve. And when I looked at his appendage, voila, it is not well closed. And I had done a double suture layer from the inside, the most common way to close the appendage. Also, if we close the appendage from the inside, if we use suture to close it from the inside, we put the circumflex coronary artery at risk. And if you do it enough times, if you close the appendage with a running suture on the inside enough times, you'll grab that circumflex coronary artery, kink it, or distort it, and have a problem. So there's risk related to it, in addition to not staying closed well. And we only know if we look. Study after study, when they looked at how well the appendage was closed surgically, they found persistent leaks into the appendage, they found pockets, they found inconsistent efficacy with surgical closure of the appendage. So I think if we step back and we look at Dr. Cox's original series of Cox-Maze procedures, now all of these patients have their entire appendage excised and sewn shut. And I've just shown you that excision isn't quite as good, it is not perfect, but it's the best of the surgical approaches. Now let's look at outcomes for those patients. So of all those patients, about 20% of them had prior thromboembolic risk. So they're the highest for recurrent thromboembolic risk. And importantly, around the time of surgery, when patients have a maze, they have about the same incidence of perioperative atrial fibrillation as other operations do. They have about 37%, about 40% of people after a maze in combination with anything are still going to have atrial fibrillation perioperatively. But as I show you here, the incidence of perioperative stroke for those patients is smaller in comparison to every other operation from the SDS database. What's the difference? They're still having atrial fibrillation, but their appendage is closed, right? And if you look at these same patients over time, indeed out to 12 years, looking at them from the perspective of their CHA2DS2-VASc risk, and admittedly now, these are patients who had Cox-Maze operations. And at 12 years, the follow-up is in the form of phone calls and touching base directly with the patient. But the important thing is, only one person had a stroke out of the entire cohort. Now, most of them are in sinus rhythm, but probably not every one of them. One stroke. They all have this in common. Their appendages go on. So let's look at what methods we might have that would be potentially better than what we do surgically. If we don't do a great job surgically. And people always say, well, I do it, we never see a problem. Well, if you look, you'll find a problem. But now here this is the clip. This is the clip that we routinely use. And this is actually during a Cox-Maze that I filmed with Dr. Cox. He's actually handling the camera here. And we took a big clot out of this left atrial appendage, a huge thrombus out of it. And now we're closing it. So we dissect out at the base a little bit to clean it up a little bit, bring the clip down onto the base of the left atrial appendage, Make sure that we're going cleanly off into the left superior pulmonary vein. We can see the appendage is fully within the grasp of the device. The device closes down, and we have a closed appendage. So this is very reliable. You get to the base, you can see the base, you know you're closing the appendage. And if you look at it from the inside, this is what it looks like. Inside the left atrium, the appendage fully closed. And this is what it looks like 7 years later. This is a gal that I had to come back who had developed mitral valve endocarditis. And I went back and I looked at her appendage closure, and that's 7 years later, flat, clean closure. This is what the device looks like in the version that I just showed you there. The short open version has shoulders, has the two bars that come together when the clip is released. And we did the original study looking at the efficacy of the device. And long story short, we had 98.3% efficacy. The one failure we had was in a follow-up TEE patient who had a pouch of 1 centimeter, which simply meant that the surgeon hadn't put the clip all the way down at the base of the left atrial appendage. The majority of the patients, we had CT evaluation, which is really the gold standard, and overall 98.3% efficacy. All of them, none of them had a communication, all of them were closed, one had a remnant. The device went on to various iterations, including the V clip, and this is the long version of that, the Pro version of the standard clip. And I'll just show you here, this is a quick video of the V clip, which is super nice, of course, that for minimally invasive approaches, it can be used under any circumstances. And this is kind of the fancier version of the V clip. I'm going to show you the kind of dumbed down version in a little bit. But the clip goes on across the base of the appendage. This doesn't have the shoulders of the original clip. You have to be sure that the tips get all the way past the end of the appendage, of course, because it opens. And when it closes first at that far tip, and then the rest of the device closes. So we did the study in open cases to prove the efficacy of the Pro V clip. And so these were open chest cases where we used that device and then studied these with CT angiography to look at how well the appendages were closed. And we saw 97.7% efficacy. The one failure actually was a patient of mine who had a big clip and had a tiny little leak right here at the base of the clip. And they went on to change the clip a little bit after that, changing the cushions here and ensuring that we always had good obliteration here. So actually 97.8%. 97.8% efficacy. The one failure was a patient who had a 1 millimeter communication with the appendage. In fact, when you look at these folks on CT angiography, at about 3 months, the appendage is gone. It gets resorbed because the necrosis dies and gets resorbed by the body. This is the short version of that V clip. So it does come in a short Flex V version. This can be used in open or minimally invasive approaches. It's kind of nicer because, in a sense, at least aesthetically, because it doesn't have the shoulders that the other clip has. This is that clip being put on through a minimally invasive approach, just like the Pro V, but you can use it in open as well. And just not to spend too much time on the same concept, but here we got to make sure we see the entirety of the appendage. And then the V clip is flexible. You can set it at the base of the appendage. And again, we need to be sure that the tips have gone all the way past the appendage because they close first. And then if we look at this from the inside in this same patient, and in fact, just to show how well it works, we're going to cut that open. Appendage is open, clip is closed. And looking at it from the inside, we see a well-closed appendage. Nothing left there, no pocket, well-closed appendage. So the people have raised a concern about the clip in the setting of vein grafts or arterial bypass grafts. Here's the V clip with a graft. We have closed several hundred appendages, including many with bypasses. We've seen no signal of occlusion of grafts as the result of the clip. The clip does cause inflammation though. So here's a patient that I had gone back on 3 years after their original surgery, and I wanted to see the clip. I didn't need to, but I dissected back there, and you can see it does induce inflammation. It becomes pretty well sealed at the back of the heart. Now, I could get to these OMs here, but it was well sealed at the back of the heart. So certainly if I needed to do a transplant on this patient, it would be challenging. We took a look, we did a study recently, which was the Ablate PAS, post-approval study for the clamp we use to perform Maze surgery, so the bipolar radiofrequency clamp. And we, as a sub-study, we looked at the patients who had had the clip closure of their appendage versus those who had had other surgical closure, which were staplers and surgical closure with suture. And it was about 50% got the appendage closed with the clip, and about 50% were surgical. And we did see a signal, although it wasn't statistically significant. There was a 35% reduction in the incidence of thromboembolic events following the patients out to 3 years if the clip was used versus standard surgical approaches. Now, the LAOS 3 trial is underway right now, which is 4,700 surgery patients who have atrial fibrillation being randomized to closure or not closure. It's estimated to close in 2022. I'm not too excited about this because meanwhile, the guidelines tell us to do a Cox-Maze or at least close the appendage for everybody who has atrial fibrillation. So in my opinion, that's old news. What might be more interesting? So I'm going to take you on a little bit of I'm going to veer off the path a little bit to some of the stuff that we've been working on in our institution. But if we look at patients who have perioperative atrial fibrillation, who have heart surgery and perioperative atrial fibrillation, we can talk about the definition of that. They have an increased risk of death and stroke all the way out to 10 years after their surgery. So if a patient has postoperative atrial fibrillation, that is a signal that they're more likely to be dead in the next several years. And they say increased mortality at all time intervals, increased risk of stroke. Future studies should be designed to provide a better understanding of postoperative atrial fibrillation pathophysiology and risk factors, as well as the impact of anticoagulation short and long term. Does that mean you're going to anticoagulate everybody who has postoperative atrial fibrillation for the rest of their life? Good luck. You can't even keep people on anticoagulation the rest of their life. It's only about 50% of people will stay on their anticoagulation. So how do we address this? If we look for postoperative atrial fibrillation, we will find it, and we will find it not only 3 days after surgery or 5 days after surgery, which is in this study, in the first 5 days, half of it occurred, but for the rest of the patients, it occurred out to 30 days. So postoperative atrial fibrillation may or may not happen while the patient's in the hospital, right? What is it that kills people with atrial fibrillation? When people have atrial fibrillation, they die from a number of different pathologies, of course, and we talked about other impacts of atrial fibrillation. But the most common cause is a stroke. It's a stroke. So if they have an open appendage, they're likely to have a stroke. New onset postoperative atrial fibrillation, long-term survival after aortic valve replacement, a 48% higher chance of being dead in a long-term follow-up if people have postoperative atrial fibrillation. Why is that happening? We know that the prime reason that people die from atrial fibrillation is they have strokes, so it probably has something to do with strokes. So this is a recent study done looking at the patients who, after surgery, had postoperative atrial fibrillation, and looking at those that were prolonged, that occurred within 30 days and then persisted for at least 1 month. And the median of that was 1.6 years of that. So in those patients, they said advanced age and left atrial enlargement were risk factors. What does that mean then for all those patients? We're supposed to close their appendage? Or maybe we should have a more robust determination of what puts people at risk for not only postoperative atrial fibrillation, but the risk of stroke for the rest of their lives. People with cardiovascular disease get atrial fibrillation. and people who have atrial fibrillation have strokes. So which one do you want? These are two patients that I've operated on. This one was very recent. This is a patient who had mitral valve endocarditis. I repaired his mitral valve and tricuspid valve and did a Cox-Maze for him. He was 4 years out from a Watchman. Now, do you want this after you've had your stroke? Or do you want this while you're in the operating room and before you've had your stroke? The stroke you never have. What's the cost of a stroke? It's very hard for us in the US to define that. The only data I could find was American Heart Association from 1990, and it was $100,000 was the lifetime cost of a stroke. $100,000 in 1990. I can only imagine what it costs now. We looked at our patients. We've been doing prophylactic appendage closure for quite a long time. This is a snapshot we took a few years ago. We're going back to look at more current data. But the take-home message of what we found with an average of 2-year follow-up in people with their appendage closed prophylactically was that when we compared our thromboembolic events at 2 years follow-up in patients who had similar operations in the data, because we have to go on historical data, we saw dramatic reductions in the likelihood, certainly of perioperative stroke, just like I showed you for the Cox-Maze, and even in follow-up out to a couple of years, as predicted by their CHA2DS2-VASc score. So that's something just to stir the pot. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Mark. We will follow for the next presentation and do the discussion at the end. Okay. O próximo palestrante é o Dr. Ricardo Ribeiro Dias, que vai nos falar sobre indicação, passo a passo, e a importância do tratamento cirúrgico da fibrilação atrial crônica nos pacientes submetidos à cirurgia cardiovascular. Dr. Ricardo, por favor.
Então, eu inicio agradecendo a Healing Med, a Tricure e a Sociedade Brasileira de Cirurgia Cardiovascular pelo convite para estar aqui hoje à noite com colegas tão distintos, com o Dr. Mark Gerdes, que é uma grande referência no assunto, para falar sobre indicação, passo a passo e a importância do tratamento cirúrgico da fibrilação atrial crônica nos pacientes submetidos à cirurgia cardiovascular. Não tenho nenhum conflito de interesse com essa apresentação, que ela basicamente acentuará alguns aspectos epidemiológicos importantes referentes à fibrilação atrial, falar sobre a indicação do tratamento cirúrgico, o que as diretrizes nos orientam a fazer e a classe de evidência, por que tão poucos pacientes serão tratados com ablação concomitante, seja na cirurgia da válvula mitral, seja em outras operações. Tentaremos enfatizar do porquê devemos tratar os pacientes com fibrilação atrial. Apresentaremos umas observações do Consenso de Especialistas de 2017 e mostraremos o passo a passo do tratamento cirúrgico antes da mensagem final. Então, em referência à fibrilação atrial, é importante ressaltarmos a grande prevalência na população mundial e a perspectiva de aumento dessa doença nos próximos 40 anos. É importante frisar também que os pacientes com fibrilação atrial têm uma incidência de acidente vasculoencefálico bastante mais elevada do que a população sem FA. Lembrar que 90% dos acidentes vasculares encefálicos são de origem isquêmica e desses 20% com associação à fibrilação atrial. Quando é possível a identificação do local do êmbolo, 90% estão localizados no apêndice atrial esquerdo. Só para relembrar, a prevalência da fibrilação atrial é muito frequente na nossa população de pacientes com doença coronariana, insuficiência cardíaca, doença valvar, hipertensão, diabético, insuficiência renal, vasculopatia periférica e, principalmente, os pacientes mais idosos, que é a população que estamos tratando cada vez mais, pacientes do século masculino, pacientes com associações genéticas e a etnia caucasiana. Na distribuição dessa doença a nível mundial, nós podemos ver, sobre 100 mil habitantes, a grande prevalência no hemisfério norte, em alguns países do norte da Europa, com a menor prevalência nos países africanos e alguns países do sul da Ásia, e no Brasil, uma prevalência entre 700 e 900 casos para cada 100 mil habitantes e que tende a aumentar com o envelhecimento da população. Na Europa, hoje, já representa praticamente 1 a cada 3 pacientes, a cada 3 indivíduos da Europa tem a fibrilação atrial, e a expectativa é que se aumente em relação ao sexo masculino e com o envelhecimento da população. Em relação ao que fazer com esses pacientes, o que as diretrizes nos orientam, numa análise prospectiva, a diretriz americana de 2014 sugere que a ablação cirúrgica tem classe 2A de ser realizada quando o paciente vai ser submetido a qualquer procedimento cardíaco, e a ablação isolada, classe 2B, para os pacientes sintomáticos com fibrilação atrial, a despeito de outras tentativas de tratamentos menos invasivos. O consenso de especialistas de 2017 já apresenta uma evolução na classe de indicação desses pacientes e considera como classe 1 a necessidade de intervenção do tratamento para todos os pacientes que são submetidos às cirurgias da válvula mitral, independente da classificação da FA, seja ela paroxística, persistente ou de longa duração. E para a classe 2A, para os pacientes submetidos à cirurgia de revascularização do miocárdio ou troca da válvula aórtica. E também progride a indicação nos procedimentos para o tratamento isolado da fibrilação atrial para a classe 2A, as persistentes e as persistentes de longa duração. A diretriz americana de 2019, ainda a despeito do que foi apresentado e das expectativas propostas pelo Dr. Gerdes, coloca que a oclusão do apêndice auricular esquerdo ainda é nível 2B de indicação, mas principalmente em função de dados mais robustos da literatura para que se progrida essa indicação. A diretriz europeia de 2020 mostra que a ablação cirúrgica concomitante aos outros procedimentos da cirurgia cardíaca é classe 2A para a cirurgia aberta ou para a cirurgia toracoscópica. E a abordagem do apêndice atrial esquerdo ainda é passível de questionamento, principalmente pelas colocações que o Dr. Gerdes fez, uma vez que os dispositivos de oclusão externa, como foi mostrado, são de uso mais recente, e a abordagem cirúrgica que vem sendo feita há bastante tempo apresenta resultados bastante insatisfatórios, em algumas situações aumentando o risco do acidente vascular cerebral. E por que será que tão poucos pacientes são tratados? Se nós formos observar a experiência americana, que seria a primeira economia no mundo onde se tem os dispositivos de tratamento para esses pacientes já há algum tempo, o Dr. McCarthy mostra, quando ele apresenta os pacientes tratados do Medicare, durante o período de 1 ano, em 2014, quase 80 mil cirurgias, dessas, quase 1/3 dos pacientes apresentavam fibrilação atrial. E somente 22% desses pacientes foram tratados. O que isso representa no número total de pacientes? Então, pacientes com doença da válvula mitral, seja plastia ou troca, apresentavam fibrilação atrial numa alta prevalência, quase metade dos pacientes. Os pacientes submetidos a troca de válvula aórtica, mais de 30%, e os coronarianos, mais de 20%. Em números absolutos, a cirurgia coronária, que tem a maior incidência, representa quase 45 mil operações, desses quase 9 mil pacientes com fibrilação atrial. A segunda cirurgia mais realizada da troca da válvula aórtica, algo em torno de 15 mil pacientes, quase 5 mil apresentavam fibrilação atrial. E os pacientes, vejam a minoria de pacientes que são tratados, né? Os pacientes da válvula mitral, que são submetidos à cirurgia da válvula mitral, tiveram ablação cirúrgica concomitante em um pouco mais de 35% desses pacientes, enquanto que os pacientes que não são pacientes com doença da válvula mitral operados com fibrilação atrial, um pouco mais de 15% desses pacientes foram submetidos à ablação cirúrgica. Ou seja, quase 85% dos pacientes nos Estados Unidos com fibrilação atrial não foram tratados no momento da cirurgia cardíaca. Será que nós não podemos fazer mais por esses pacientes? O Dr. Vinay Bardwar mostrou aqui, de 2011 a 2014, durante 4 anos, 87 mil pacientes operados registrados no banco de dados do STS com fibrilação atrial. Será especificarei os subgrupos mais para frente, mas analisando pacientes semelhantes, quase 29 mil pacientes com fibrilação atrial, aqueles que foram submetidos à ablação concomitante, em comparação aos que não foram, aqueles tratados tiveram um risco relativo menor para mortalidade em 30 dias e menos acidente vascular cerebral. Tiveram um pouco mais de insuficiência renal e a necessidade de implante de marca-passo. Quando nós vamos analisar com mais cuidado esses dados, então foram quase 840 mil cirurgias e 62 mil ablações. Se nós formos olhar o total de pacientes com FA, eram quase 112 mil pacientes, excluído operações mais complexas. Nós temos quase 90 mil pacientes com fibrilação atrial no pré-operatório, onde 45 mil não foram submetidos à ablação, 42 foram submetidos à ablação. E para tentar obter dados robustos de comparação, eles tentaram tornar os grupos mais semelhantes, agrupando-os de acordo com o tipo de FA, com o tipo de operação realizada e com as comorbidades no pré-operatório, e separaram em 28.739 pacientes submetidos à ablação, comparado com o mesmo número não submetidos à ablação, e aí nós tivemos uma grande diferença de resultado, com benefício para menor mortalidade e menor complicação neurológica. E o que já foi dito, uma maior necessidade de marca-passo e insuficiência renal. Então, por que, reforçando o que foi dito, mostrando o porquê é feito tão pouco, vamos tentar enfatizar por que nós devemos tratar esses pacientes com fibrilação atrial. Nós devemos tratar porque a cirurgia para FA é uma cirurgia que apresenta um resultado consistente na recuperação do ritmo sinusal, porque ela consegue reduzir essa complicação que é extremamente prejudicial para o paciente, que é o acidente vascular cerebral, ela aumenta a sobrevida e melhora a qualidade de vida. Então, aqui o Dr. Ren, do grupo do Dr. Damiano, com a cirurgia hoje, a cirurgia de escolha para o tratamento da fibrilação atrial, que é o COX-MACE-4, com mais de 500 pacientes, mostrou que em 5 anos, o número de pacientes que se manteve em ritmo sinusal foi próximo de 80%, e livre de drogas antiarrítmicas, 66%. E não houve diferença de resultado em relação ao tipo de fibrilação atrial que o paciente apresentava, seja paroxística, persistente ou persistência de longa permanência. E, a despeito, então, do tipo de FA e do tamanho do átrio esquerdo, este resultado se manteve, e o que impactou numa piora do resultado foi o tempo de fibrilação atrial pré-operatória. E como perspectiva, eles sugerem que talvez o tempo de aparecimento da fibrilação atrial no futuro possa ser um indicador para uma cirurgia mais precoce, desde que, obviamente, a ablação cirúrgica se torne uma ferramenta para esses pacientes. O grupo do Dr. Nive também, com 5 anos de segmento, com quase 800 pacientes seguidos de uma forma bastante específica para a fibrilação atrial, com eletrocardiograma e com Holter, mostrou um resultado para 2 e 5 anos, com 2 anos, quase 90% de manutenção do ritmo sinusal, em 5 anos 85%, e livre de drogas antiarrítmicas nos 2 anos 80% e 70% no final de 5 anos. E como preditor de bom resultado, foi o átrio esquerdo pequeno, ou seja, uma indicação mais precoce, e preditor de 5 anos de bom resultado, o tamanho do átrio esquerdo e idade, né, os pacientes mais jovens, quando tratados no momento. Este gráfico mostra, então, a excelência do resultado, a capacidade que o procedimento cirúrgico tem em recuperar o ritmo sinusal e manter esses pacientes no ritmo sinusal, e um grande número deles livre de drogas antiarrítmicas. O mesmo grupo tentou identificar fatores preditores de sucesso para esse procedimento. E, com quase 70% de pacientes sem FA no primeiro ano, eles puderam observar que aquele grupo de pacientes que não apresentava recidiva da FA no primeiro ano evoluía muito melhor quando comparado àqueles que tinham a recidiva. e observou também que a experiência do cirurgião em realizar o procedimento também teve impacto positivo no melhor resultado desses pacientes. Então, aqui é nítido o benefício daqueles pacientes que no primeiro ano não apresentam fibrilação atrial em comparação com aqueles que apresentam fibrilação atrial, como eles se comportam no final de 60 meses. E como fator de recorrência, foi considerado a idade avançada e a duração da FE pré-operatória, como o grupo Dr. Damiano já havia mostrado em trabalhos anteriores, como fatores preditores para a recorrência, tá certo? A redução do acidente vascular cerebral já foi mostrada, os dispositivos de tratamento da aurícula esquerda hoje mais modernos, mais eficientes do que a abordagem cirúrgica, o Dr. Gerdes já explicou isso muito bem, e o aumento da sobrevida também, os dados do STS são bastante robustos para mostrar o impacto imediato do benefício desse tratamento, assim como o consenso de especialistas de 2017 mostrou, seja no menor de 30 dias, como em mais de 30 dias de segmento. O Dr. McCarthy, agora, numa apresentação recente do ATS, ele mostrou também, relatou a experiência de alguns grupos americanos, onde a ablação cirúrgica no paciente com FA e naquele paciente com FA não tratado, o benefício para todas as experiências em redução de mortalidade num prazo de 5 anos de segmento. O impacto na qualidade de vida desses pacientes também é evidente. Tá? Então, uma vez reforçado esse benefício de resultado, vamos ressaltar algumas respostas específicas que esse consenso de especialistas de 2017 nos trouxe. Primeiro, que a despeito da complexidade do procedimento e da extensão que essa abordagem nos faz no procedimento cirúrgico que indicou a operação, isso não houve impacto na incidência, no aumento da morbidade perioperatória. Não houve impacto na redução de AVC imediata, mas no AVC tardio sim houve impacto. A melhora na qualidade de vida foi evidente. A melhora na sobrevida imediata e tardia também foi evidente. É um procedimento que pode ser feito como procedimento isolado, principalmente nos pacientes sintomáticos, onde houve falha, seja do tratamento clínico, seja do tratamento percutâneo, que a fonte de energia para o tratamento pode ser tanto com a frequência bipolar ou com a crioablação, e que a experiência do cirurgião na realização desse procedimento é muito importante para o resultado do procedimento. Tá? Rapidamente, o passo a passo sobre o tratamento cirúrgico desta operação. Então, aqui na diretriz de 2020, eles falam que o isolamento, o tratamento das veias pulmonares isolado, ele é efetivo para a transformação do ritmo de FA para o ritmo sinusal, porém, uma cirurgia mais completa, como a proposta pelo COX-MEIS 4, ela apresenta melhores resultados. Então, quando você não só isola as pulmonares, mas trata a parede posterior do átrio esquerdo, trata as linhas em relação à válvula mitral, ao anel tricúspide e trabalha no átrio direito. E que os clamps bipolar de radiofrequência e a criotermia são as principais fontes para o tratamento desses pacientes. O Dr. Damiano, nesse trabalho, ele ilustra de forma bastante didática o passo a passo desse procedimento. Então, no preparo desse paciente, a canulação arterial é a mesma. O que é importante na canulação venosa é que seja feita nas veias cavas para que você tenha espaço para trabalhar no átrio direito. É importante o isolamento, a dissecção das veias pulmonares do lado direito e do lado esquerdo, para que você possa fazer a utilização do clamp para a lesão transmural das veias pulmonares, uma abertura da aurícula esquerda para que seja feita uma lesão transmural também em direção à veia pulmonar inferior esquerda. Aí você retorna para o átrio direito, você estende a comunicação, você trabalha na parede posterior do átrio esquerdo, primeiro na região próxima ao anel da mitral, depois na região mais próxima do anel aórtico. Você faz a lesão em direção à válvula mitral em torno de 4, 5 horas. É importante estender até o anel da mitral com a criotermia, tanto endocárdica quanto epicárdica, e aí você parte para o átrio direito. No átrio direito, é proposto que você faça uma lesão na face posterior da aurícula direita em direção à veia cava superior. Depois, com a triotomia esquerda, como demonstrado aqui, você pode fazer a lesão em direção à cava superior agora pela face mais anterior, em direção à cava inferior, e depois você complementa fazendo as lesões aí por criotermia em direção ao anel da tricúspide, tanto às 2 horas quanto às 11 horas. Com isso, você fez o tratamento de toda a abordagem do lado esquerdo e direito do coração. Do lado esquerdo, você pode fazer anteriormente à realização da abordagem da mitral, ou mesmo anteriormente à cirurgia de revascularização, troca da válvula aórtica. E a parte esquerda você pode fazer depois da resolução cirúrgica do que levou esse paciente à cirurgia e completar com a aorta aberta, enquanto o paciente recupera-se da isquemia miocárdica durante o procedimento inicial. Então, como mensagem final, vale a pena a gente ressaltar de por que não realizar a ablação cirúrgica quando nós levamos esse paciente para a cirurgia que nós fazemos habitualmente. O procedimento é complexo? Ele não é simples, mas também não é complexo, principalmente depois de realizado algumas vezes. Agora, com esses dispositivos que estão chegando para nós, a complexidade do procedimento se reduzirá. E, claro, a partir de alguns casos realizados, assim que ele se torne um procedimento habitual, não nos trará nenhuma dificuldade em ser realizado. Há detalhes anatômicos a serem levados em consideração, como todo procedimento que se começa a se realizar. É um procedimento que acrescenta tempo? Ele acrescenta tempo, mas o benefício é visível. Você não tem aumento de morbidade operatória, como foi demonstrado, você tem redução de mortalidade intra-hospitalar quanto tardia, e o benefício na qualidade de vida do paciente, que é o objetivo do nosso tratamento, é evidente. Há um certo problema, um calcanhar de Aquiles, que é relacionado à necessidade de marca-passo, maior necessidade de marca-passo nesses procedimentos, mas hoje, para os grupos experientes, essa intercorrência, digamos assim, ela tem uma ocorrência bastante baixa. Então, é um procedimento que não deve ser contraindicado simplesmente pelo maior risco da necessidade do marca-passo. Tá bom? Eu espero ter atendido a todo o tema que foi designado para mim, e também me coloco à disposição para qualquer discussão no momento oportuno. Muito obrigado.
Okay. Muito obrigado, Dr. Ricardo, pela excelente e completa apresentação. Nós vamos dar prosseguimento com a terceira apresentação do Dr. Ricardo Miguel Francisco, que vai nos falar sobre a sua experiência inicial com o AtriClip aqui no Brasil. Como faz? Dr. Ricardo.
Boa noite a todos os colegas, e gostaria de agradecer à SBCCV pelo convite, a Healing Med, a AtriClip, a AtriCure, e estou muito feliz de estar aqui junto aos professores, meus professores na maioria. Bom, enfim, é um tema, é um título difícil, porque como eu faço, então eu estou numa fase muito inicial de usar o AtriClip, mas confesso que eu fiquei muito empolgado com isso. Para dizer a todos os meus colegas do Brasil, facilita muito, estimula a fazer, e já que abrimos o tórax, eu acho obrigatório fechar a auriculeta esquerda, como já foi mostrado, né? O apêndice atrial esquerdo. Então, o que eu fiz? Houve uma demonstração primeiro no meu consultório do AtriClip, muito fácil de entender, sem nenhum problema, e nós começamos a fazer. Eu tenho 7 casos somente, 7 casos. Um paciente era um testemunha de Jeová, portador de aneurisma da aorta, foi feito um benta-aldebono, ele tinha uma severa estenose aórtica e um aneurisma de aorta de quase 6 centímetros, e nós usamos o AtriClip, ficou muito bom. E vale dizer que todas as cirurgias a gente tem feito com eco transesofágico. Então, isso é outra arma boa, outra ferramenta que facilita muito tanto a cirurgia, tanto o controle, como todos sabemos, e o implante do AtriClip apenas vai demonstrar que a auriculeta ficou bem ocluída. 3 pacientes foram coronarianos, com ritmo sinusal, mas utilizamos o AtriClip, fechamos a auriculeta, e 3 pacientes são aórticos, troca de válvula aórtica, sendo que um deles recebeu 2 pontes também. Então, foi um procedimento associado. Todos os pacientes foram, todas as cirurgias com eco transesofágico, todos a auriculeta ficou 100% ocluída, e uma preocupação minha é que nós fazemos por questões de escola e porque gostamos da ponte retroórtica, ponte de safena retroórtica, quando revascularizamos as marginais da circunflexa. Então, isso me preocupava um pouco sobre o posicionamento do AtriClip, se não iria quincar as pontes, ocluir as pontes, né? Obstruir, mas não. Houve folga suficiente para passagem das pontes no espaço retroórtico, né? E sem nenhum problema. Então, foi bastante fácil utilizar isso, mesmo no coronariano e mesmo fazendo isso. Qual o momento que eu utilizei o AtriClip? Foi justamente ao entrar em extracorpórea. Então, o coração fica mais vazio, mais confortável, e é muito fácil. Nós tombamos o coração, como se fosse fazer ponte nas marginais, medimos com aquele medidorzinho que já foi demonstrado. Aí só para mostrar, já foi mostrado também o AtriClip aberto. Agora fechado. Então, é muito fácil de utilizar, muito rápido, e a gente já tem experiência até em tamanho do átrio. Às vezes, só de olhar, a gente já calcula qual o AtriClip que vai ser utilizado, mas com o medidorzinho não tem dúvida alguma, não há erro. E lá está, a auriculeta, o AtriClip colocadinho, mas é muito fácil. O Roberto me ajudou na cirurgia, meu assistente, trabalhamos juntos há 25 anos, tivemos a formação no Instituto Dante Pazanese de Cardiologia. Então é fácil, ele puxou a auriculeta, eu abri o AtriClip com a mão direita, com a mão esquerda, eu mesmo dou tombo no coração, como vocês podem ver aqui. Eu abro o AtriClip, ele puxa, veste o AtriClip na auriculeta esquerda e soltamos o AtriClip na base da auriculeta esquerda. Cortamos ali a cordinha que prende para completar liberação muito fácil e rápida. Isso não leva 20 segundos, exagerando 30 segundos. Mas fica um pouco envergonhado, porque como eu faço em 7 casos, me deixa um pouco constrangido. Mas é muito fácil, mais fácil do que dar ponto, mais fácil do que fazer bolsa externamente, e funciona bem. Eu acho que o mais importante é a gente se conscientizar que tem que fazer em todos os casos de um jeito ou de outro, e conseguindo a liberação, evidentemente, de quem paga a conta, eu acho que vale a pena fazer em 100% dos casos. Eu gostaria de mostrar só o eco. Isso, a auriculeta aberta, podemos ver aí perto da válvula mitral, à direita do vídeo. Então, ela toda aberta ali. Esse caso foi um coronariano, não tinha trombos dentro do apêndice atrial, o que é bom, senão impediria de fazer. Evidentemente, teríamos que abrir o átrio direito para tirar e fechar a auriculeta por dentro. Mas é só uma questão de dizer isso, né? Para valvular, tudo é bom ter o eco transesofágico para afastarmos isso. E é o vídeo aí final, mostrando a auriculeta totalmente ocluída, sem fluxo nenhum. Nos 7 casos, isso se repetiu. Então, deixa muito confortável. E é isso, a nossa experiência inicial, que já foi falado, é que a FA é tratada também nos nossos pacientes. Nós fazemos a cirurgia de Koch Maze 4 sempre que possível e fechamos de rotina a auriculeta esquerda sempre que abrimos o átrio esquerdo por dentro e por fora nos pacientes que não abrimos o átrio esquerdo. E, mais uma vez, eu estimulo a todos os colegas a usarem o AtriClip, não tenho nenhum conflito de interesse, mas realmente facilita muito, estimula a fazer e não deixar nenhuma auriculeta aberta. Muito obrigado.
Muito obrigado, doutor Ricardo Miguel Francisco. A sua experiência é pequena, mas aqui no nosso meio é grande. É talvez a maior experiência no momento, então sempre vale a pena ouvir quem já tem experiência, né?
Pelo menos tive essa vantagem aqui no Brasil, no Rio de Janeiro. Muito obrigado.
Gostaria de abrir agora, então, para perguntas, né? Alguém tem algum comentário adicional ou pergunta a fazer? Tem uma pergunta para o Dr. Ricardo and also for Dr. Mark Gerdes. A question for you that already have experience with the AtriClip. The complications, what is the risk of bleeding, rupture, or to find the thrombus that was not previously diagnosed? What are the risks of applying AtriClip as a lone procedure?
Well, as far as documented complications, the only one that I'm aware of is an isolated case where the surgeon pulled up too hard on the appendage as he seated the clip and was able to kink the circumflex coronary artery. It's the only reported case of that. There are no reported cases of bleeding after the clip is implanted. One of the complications, I guess, would be that if you don't put the clip all the way down onto the appendage, the clip has to be all the way down at the base of the appendage or you'll leave a pocket. And so for patients who have had standalone clips or thoracoscopic clips, there have been a couple of reported cases where the clip wasn't put on all the way at the base of the left atrial appendage. That's pretty hard to do in an open case because you're looking right at the appendage and you can get down to the base of it. But for thoracoscopic, or I suppose for minimally invasive going through the transverse sinus, it's possible to put the clip on and not get it all the way down at the base of the appendage. They don't leak. I chop the top off of the appendage all the time and close the appendage with the clip. And you saw in that one video, it's a huge appendage that's completely open and we put the clip on it and that's it. So I guess the other thing would be, is it possible in somebody who has atrial fibrillation that you would put the clip on and not know that they have clot in the appendage? So for those patients, if they have atrial fibrillation or a history of atrial fibrillation, and you're putting the clip on, you better have a good TEE, transesophageal echocardiogram, beforehand or during the operation to look to be sure there's no clot in there before you put the clip on. If you are arrested, if the heart is arrested, and you're going to put the clip on concomitantly, and you have any concern about anything in the appendage, open the appendage. Even if you're not going into the left atrium, chop off the top of the appendage and look inside of it and make sure that there's nothing there, and then put the clip on.
Okay, Renato, there is a question from the audience. I think it's for Dr. Mark. There is a question: if patients with enlarged left atrium that present during operation during the TEE, like spontaneous contrast in the left atrial appendix, but without atrial fibrillation, if you would recommend to apply the AtriClip or not in this case, what's your opinion?
So it's spontaneous contrast in the appendage, right?
Yes.
So stagnant flow in the appendage. So yeah, I think it's a really interesting case, really interesting scenario. It's something you might especially see in somebody with mitral stenosis and rheumatic disease. And yes, I would advocate that the appendage should be closed. I would say it should be closed, because by seeing that contrast, you know that that patient is at high risk of forming thrombus. They may not have the clot then, but they will, or they may have even had clots there before. You just aren't seeing it. So, of course, if they were in atrial fibrillation, it's an easier call. We close appendages on pretty much anybody who has a CHA2DS2-VASc score of 2 or higher, period. So we're very aggressive. But certainly, if you had someone with a big left atrium and there's contrast in the left atrium, there's stagnation, there's poor flow there, it would make a great deal of sense to close the appendage for those patients. You know, one of the reasons that, Ricardo did a fantastic job of laying out the background on atrial fibrillation, on the maze, et cetera. One of the things that you see in there is that the societies, they're not sure they want to recommend closing the appendage. And one of the reasons for that is because if you look at the surgical literature says that surgeons can't close the appendage very well. They cannot do it very well. So now, though, I mean, recognizing that the clip, and I showed you the data, the clip is almost infallible. I mean, you can put it on wrong, but it's almost perfect. So I think that in these situations where you think there's risk related to the appendage, just close the appendage. I mean, I think we kind of owe that to the patient.
Dr. Mark, we are in this webinar talking about closing the atrial appendage during surgery, during cardiac surgery. But there is an indication for closing the atrial appendage in patients with atrial fibrillation and doing it percutaneously or thoracoscopically. Could you talk a little to us about that, the indications? How do you see the indication as opposed to the Watchman or other percutaneous device?
Right. So this is a very challenging subject, and it's challenging for a couple of different reasons. The first reason is that the Watchman was approved and without very good data. I mean, it's okay, it's not terrible, but the Watchman is not as good as Coumadin for preventing strokes, ischemic strokes. It's better, of course, at avoiding bleeding and better at avoiding hemorrhagic strokes. So, but, you know, they redid the study several times until they got the thing passed. Now, that is a device that's very expensive and that had a lot of support from the company, big money being poured in, and they finally got that device cleared. I'm not saying it's a terrible device. I'm just saying that that's the history of the Watchman device. And then you have the clip, which occupies this smaller space in appendage management because it's a surgical device. And it isn't fueled by an expectation that everybody's going to get their appendage closed with a clip. Watchman is fueled by the expectation that everybody will get their appendage closed with a Watchman. So if we look at this from a physiologic, anatomic perspective, when we close the appendage with a clip and we do it well, we leave the patient with only endothelium. They don't have any pockets, they don't have any foreign device, and that's a very sound physiologic closure. With the Watchman, we leave them. I showed you a picture of a patient that had a Watchman 4 years before. You look in there, often it's not covered by anything. It still remains a thromboembolic risk. It's not a high risk, but it's a risk. So in that context, we have the clip, which probably achieves a safer, better closure, and the Watchman, which you can put through somebody's leg. So we aren't going to own that space. It's not, everybody's not going to say, oh, we'll put a clip instead of doing a Watchman. But what you do have is a segment of patients that need their appendage closed, that, number one, perhaps cannot be on any anticoagulation, If you get a Watchman, you're supposed to be anticoagulated for 6 weeks. For patients who cannot be anticoagulated at all, it might make more sense to do a thoracoscopic clip. For patients who have an appendage that is not amenable to a Watchman, which is probably about 30% of people who have atrial fibrillation that need their appendage closed, they don't have good anatomy for a Watchman. So the reality of it is that for patients who can't be anticoagulated at all, patients that don't have good anatomy for the Watchman, they are both reasonable candidates for a thoracoscopic clip. The other issue to be dealt with is that the Watchman is extremely expensive. So depending on the economics of the institution, that may or may not favor a clip, which is considerably less expensive, which we know is still going to be very effective in closing the appendage. So those are all the different arguments for addressing it in both ways.
Question, Mark. What about, would you recommend to, what level of anticoagulation in patients with atrial fibrillation that keep on atrial fibrillation, although you have clipped the left atrial appendix? Do you think they could be less anticoagulated? What is your approach? What's your recommendation for patients that you exclude the appendix, left atrial appendix, but they are still on AF?
Right. So that's a complex concept because we haven't treated the atrial fibrillation, but we've treated the appendage. So there is no, first of all, there's no good data on this, but we can extrapolate from what we know. First, we know that people who have a Watchman, a foreign body in their left atrial appendage, you can stop their anticoagulation and they do as well as Coumadin with an open appendage. They have a few more strokes, but they have less bleeding and less hemorrhagic strokes. So right there, that sets the stage. Now, if we close the appendage more effectively, if we close the appendage with a clip and we get all the way down to the base and we see that well on the echocardiogram, that would speak to if a patient is high risk for anticoagulation, that you could stop the anticoagulation. So let's be a little more bold. What about the patient that, well, they could take anticoagulation, but you close the appendage. So is it less risky for them to be off anticoagulation? So that's going to be, that will be an interplay between whether their atrium is dilated, what their other risks are for thrombus formation, and whether they have a very high CHA2DS2-VASc score. So I think that, for example, if somebody had a CHA2DS2-VASc score of 2 and their atrium is not very big and they're stuck in atrial fibrillation and their appendage is closed, I think it's very reasonable to stop their anticoagulation. If the CHA2DS2-VASc score is 6, they've had strokes in the past, their atrium is very big, they have other places to form clot, they have elevated inflammatory markers, then those patients are going to be pro-thrombus formation. And even though their appendage is closed with a clip, if they don't have a contraindication anticoagulation, they should probably be anticoagulated. But if they develop a contraindication anticoagulation, then I think the most reasonable thing obviously to do is stop the anticoagulation. So it's a spectrum. It's a spectrum from low CHA2DS2-VASc score, small atrium, to high CHA2DS2-VASc score, big atrium. And then the other factors that are prothrombotic for patients based on inflammatory markers and their atherosclerotic burden. So it's something that I think clinicians have to look at, not just, I don't think a clinician should just say, oh, well, we don't have proof for that. We don't have data for that. Well, we have data for a lot of things that we can make sense of it with. So find what makes the most sense for the patient.
One is from Paula Oliveira. She's asking, in patients with heart failure, yes, the risk of excluding the left atrial appendix, if you have experience with this group of patients.
So we don't know, again, so these are such good questions. And we do not know the absolute answer to this question. But what we think that perhaps people with bad diastolic heart failure, perhaps it might be important to them to keep their appendage. We don't know. The most important thing for people with heart failure is if they have atrial fibrillation, that we fix their atrial fibrillation. That is the most important thing for people with heart failure. There's a very good paper recently looking at HFpEF, heart failure, preserved ejection fraction, medical management, not surgical, and looking at the impact of treating and being successful in treating atrial fibrillation in patients with HFpEF, heart failure, preserved ejection fraction. So these are diastolic heart failure, and it's dramatic. The negative impact of atrial fibrillation on people with diastolic heart failure is dramatic. And when you fix the heart failure, you improve their congestive heart. When you fix the atrial fibrillation, you definitely improve their heart failure. So again, a complex question. In a patient who has heart failure, who has a big atrium, and then you close their appendage, it may not have as much consequence because their atrium's big already. So we're not certain about it. I can tell you that in our experience, we've closed a lot of appendages on people with heart failure. But if they had atrial fibrillation, we fixed their atrial fibrillation. So I don't know that I have a clear answer to the question in the sense that we would go after the atrial fibrillation as well.
Okay, and there is another question from the audience. Patients with enlarged left atrial with spontaneous contrast, but without no atrial fibrillation, and submitted to mitral valve replacement, if you always clip the left atrial appendix.
Definitely. Yeah,
okay.
because this is a very clear-cut scenario. Even though the left atrium is large and the rest of the left atrium is still going to be risky, the left atrial appendage is clearly the most risk. It has the least blood flow in it. It's the highest likelihood of forming clot. So we would definitely close the appendage for that patient.
I have a final question, might be a final question. There is a tendency from some surgeons to close the left atrial appendage anytime you open the chest. Any surgery you are going to do, they say it's advisable to close the atrial appendage. What do you think about that?
Well, so now we're kind of getting into personal opinion, right? I think we are very aggressive in our hospital. We routinely close the appendage. Most of our patients have their appendage closed when we do heart surgery on them. But it fits into an entire philosophy of management. So we close the appendage. If they have atrial fibrillation after surgery, they didn't have atrial fibrillation before surgery. If they have atrial fibrillation after surgery, we do not anticoagulate them. We'll treat them, we'll give them amiodarone, whatever. Now, if they get stuck in atrial fibrillation and stay in it for weeks, then we put them on anticoagulation only because we need to cardiovert them. Mm-hmm. And we cannot cardiovert patients without anticoagulating them. When we look at our data, we look at our patients that we're able to follow for a mean of 2 years, for an average of 2 years, we find a substantial reduction in thromboembolic events in patients who do not have a history of atrial fibrillation. Perhaps the most startling is the impact on stroke incidence around the time of surgery. when we're doing big complex operations on people, and we see this very, very low incidence of stroke. So we do it commonly. Now, do I say that that's the right decision? I don't know yet. I'm trying to prove it. We do have a study that we did an early study randomizing people who do not have a history of atrial fibrillation. And we did see evidence of less thromboembolic stroke in patients who had their appendage closed. The problem with the study was we let them anticoagulate patients after surgery if they had atrial fibrillation. It was up to the clinician. So our plan is to do another study now where patients will be randomized to clip or no clip. And then if they have the clip, they do not get anticoagulated after surgery if they have atrial fibrillation. So we're trying to answer the question. But it begs the issue of what I was talking about earlier, which is very strong evidence that if a person has post-operative atrial fibrillation, their likelihood of having a stroke or dying in the next 10 years is significantly higher than patients who don't have post-operative atrial fibrillation. And we have no way to predict who's going to have it. So I lean toward closing the appendage. I do not have the final proof for that. I'm not offended by the idea of people closing appendages because I think appendages are dangerous. I think you do have to think a little bit about people who have bad diastolic heart failure if you're going to close the appendage. We talked about that earlier. But I think the appendage definitely does more harm than good. So we're waiting to prove this theory, though.
I said that was the final question, but there are two questions in the chat. First of it is, what's your experience and opinion about suture closure of the left atrial appendage?
So So depending on what type of suture closure, right? So there's ligating the appendage, there's sewing it shut from the inside, there's sewing it shut from the outside, and then there's cutting it off and closing it. So of all of those ways of closing the appendage, we have good data to show none of them works great, but the best of them is to cut the appendage off low and then sew it shut with reinforcement. Closing it from the inside or ligating it has not done well. Now, people always say, well, I do it all the time and my patients are doing fine. If you sew the appendage shut from the inside, and then you studied all of those patients, you are going to find open appendages and you are going to find clot. So I showed that. We have good studies that show that. So the reality of it is, even though everybody's a good heart surgeon, we can't depend on that tissue to stay closed. If you want to close it surgically without a clip, then you should cut it off close to the base and sew it shut very low and be sure you don't hurt the circumflex coronary artery. That's the only way that I think you can reliably get it to work surgically.
And now the final question is, when the echo demonstrates calcification, endocardial calcification in the left atrium, very near to the left atrial appendage, what do you do?
So first of all, you probably see that more than I do, right? Because we see rheumatic disease, but you know, and actually quite a bit of it in Indianapolis. But in my entire career, I've only had maybe 4 or 5 calcified atria, 4 or 5. So, but they're terrifying, and I think that my opinion would be that I would not try to close that appendage. That's just a really difficult patient, and you can't effectively close that appendage. And also, usually when they're calcified, the appendage is so huge that the base of or the atrium is so huge that the base of the appendage gets spread out. You have seen this, and it's this huge opening. You can't close it.
I think Fernando could talk a little bit about this, Fernando Moraes. Well, have you seen lots of calcified left atrium lately?
Yes, it's a real challenge, Khalil, in mitral valve surgery. But I agree. I try not to decalcify very much the left atrium, otherwise it sometimes bleeds a lot. And but it's a good trick that Mark has advised us not to try to clip this left atrial appendix in these situations. But I would like to have perhaps one final question about his experience, Mark. As far as I know, you have done this mitral atrial clip application through left thoracotomy. Could you speculate, or could you tell us a little bit what are the good indications for this case to do the application of the atrial clip through left thoracotomy?
Sure. So we talked a little bit about that earlier, isolated closure of the appendage with the clip. And so the patients that we see for that are either patients that can have no anticoagulation at all. So there are, if a patient is evaluated for a Watchman, that patient has to be anticoagulated for 6 weeks after the Watchman goes in. So if a patient cannot have any anticoagulation, that's a very good indication for either you could either do a mini thoracotomy or you can do thoracoscopy. So you can do it with a thoracoscope. Thoracoscope is actually quite easy. Or you could do a little thoracotomy and use the less expensive clip. Then you can do a thoracotomy and open. So, I mean on the left side here. I'm thinking of the mini mitral. The mini mitral, so you could do a little thoracotomy or you could do a thoracoscopy. So patients who can not have any anticoagulation at all, who they can't have a Watchman, so they have the clip. Or a patient that the anatomy of the appendage won't accommodate a Watchman, then they could have a clip. Now, as I mentioned also earlier though, there might be some balance in there. If you look at a particular patient, you think, well, the Watchman has this risk and this has this risk. Quite honestly, we end up usually getting the Watchman to do the clip on the really sickest, biggest, fattest people, right? Sick, big, fat people. But if you get one who's not like that, it's a very fast procedure and they go home in a day or two. So I think that depends a little bit on your relationship with the cardiologists, especially the ones who do Watchman. But it's a very good way to close the appendage. It's very reliable. So, but definitely in the US, the patients that would be good candidates are those that cannot have any anticoagulation and those that a Watchman will not fit.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mark, for your excellent presentation. Thank you, Dr. Ricardo Francisco and Dr. Ricardo Dias that already had to left us. Fernando, gostaria de dizer algumas palavras finais e encerrar?
First of all, Dr. Mark, I'd like to thank you once again. And I also would like to thank you, the society, for the privilege to moderate this session with Professor Khalil and our colleagues, our Ricardo Dias and Ricardo Miguel. And also I'd like to thank the HeartLink for the opportunity to be here with you. I think we had a very wonderful webinar, and I think I'd like to close now this webinar. Thank you once more.
Thank you for the privilege.
Thank you for you all. Muito obrigado a todos.
See you in real life sometime.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
Goodbye.
Thank you. Boa noite a todos.
Boa noite.